the Super Bowl coming up. It's coming to New Orleans. New Orleans has had quite a year here already, and it's kind of still going on. We're just in the beginning of this. So Trey, thanks so much for coming on today to talk about the Superdome. You are an architect, correct?
Correct.
And tell me what your firm is.
Yeah, Trahan Architects. We're located in New Orleans and New York City.
Okay, so the Super Bowl is happening here in New Orleans this year at the Superdome. The Superdome has quite the history. Can you take me back to the very beginning of the Superdome, when it was built?
Yeah, it was built, they started design in the early 70s. Governor John McKithen initiated the project, and the architects chosen were Curtis and Davis, a New Orleans firm, an excellent firm that did some national and international work. Yeah, and they programmed and designed a venue that at that time was to host events not only for football, but Major League Baseball and basketball, NBA basketball. And so it was a multi-sports venue, and also to accommodate other types of events from an exhibition perspective, as well as concert and those types of things.
Gotcha. All right. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and I know that stuff that was built in the 70s and 80s didn't exactly factor in things like weather and climate. So, what is your knowledge of when the Superdome was initially built, how weather and climate was factored in?
Well, codes were a little different then, and of course we didn't have massive computers to design structural systems as we do today. Yeah, I mean Louisiana, the designers at that time, I'm confident, knew of the impact of hurricane force winds.
So, for those, we have listeners from not only all over the country, but all over the world. Can you tell us a little bit about not only the Superdome, but New Orleans as a whole, where it sits, the vulnerabilities, what we're looking at here?
Well, a settlement, the earliest settlement was the French Quarter on the Mississippi River, a town that resides close to the Gulf. And of course, we're losing land daily as it relates to the impact of climate change and the result of a river, the massive Mississippi, that was levied off. And so I think they estimate that we're losing a football field of land about every hour. And so the Gulf is progressively moving closer to downtown New Orleans. And so the impact is much greater.
And then where in New Orleans is the Superdome?
Yeah, so the Superdome is in the Central Business District, right adjacent to the French Quarter and adjacent to the Warehouse District. So a location that allows for many tourists to arrive, enjoy many incredible restaurants and hotel accommodations, and unlike so many other NFL venues, walk and experience an extremely walkable city to and after the event taking place. So it's beautifully positioned such that it resides within a number of faubourgs having access to the dome.
Were you in New Orleans in August of 2005?
I was not. At that time, I was in Baton Rouge and, of course, didn't experience the impact of the hurricane like those in New Orleans, but we did experience the hurricane. I was living downtown Baton Rouge, and LSU was used, the campus, as a place of triaging people. I remember hearing throughout the night, days, the massive helicopters moving in.
I know for New Orleans, it's been 20 years, but probably feels pretty fresh. And I think we're all very familiar, at least anybody who was alive during this, very familiar with what happened at the Superdome. And the place that was supposed to be a shelter for so many became a place of terror. Can you tell me what happened structurally with the Superdome that caused that?
Yeah. Well, in a structure, an assembly structure, meaning assembly occupancy, like the Superdome, what is designed into the structure is a smoke evacuation system, meaning if a fire occurred, these massive 8 apex vents that are at the apex of the roof would open up and allow smoke to be released into the outer atmosphere. These vents are what we refer to flashed and counterflashed into the roofing system of the dome. And the dome at that time had a membrane roof as the final coating, over an insulation deck, which is over a structural metal deck, which is over the structural framing system. And we believe that there was a compromised flashing, counter flashing detail, meaning it wasn't installed to specifications at the level it should have. And so those hurricane force winds began to pull back that roofing membrane at the crown of the roof and began to peel that membrane off the roof, almost like you peel an outer layer of an onion, and exposing the insulation system. And then it began to experience those hurricane force winds. And so that those insulation layers began to detach from the structural deck. And then, of course, once the deck was exposed, the fasteners apparently were not attached or engineered to resist winds at that speed. And so the result was the metal deck was removed in places, creating a gaping hole in the roof, which of course then resulted in elevated winds internally and of course rain into the interior of the dome.
So was there an investigation done afterwards? Is that how you know that?
There was a team. We were placed on the roof approximately somewhere between 45 and 60 days after the hurricane. You can take elevators or stairs up to a certain level, and then you can walk within a catwalk system right under the structural roof system. And at a certain place, you can move up a ship's ladder onto a hatch and onto the roof. And approximately 15 architects and engineers and client reps were placed on the roof to inspect the roof at that time after the hurricane. I'll never forget, one of the structural engineers commented that there were still some soft spots in the roof and that we should not congregate and remain dispersed on the roof. And occasionally we would find ourselves congregating as we began to discuss what we were seeing. And the structural engineer would come and he would remind us, he'd say, I'm going to remind you guys, you're going to end up on the field level if you don't disperse, because we're not quite sure where the soft spots still remain on the roof. But I mean, there's not full confirmation of that, but I think the team was pretty confident that's what took place.
Gotcha. Okay, so then enter your involvement here. How did that play out, and what were you tasked to do?
Yeah, so we were selected by the Louisiana State Facility Planning and Control to serve as the lead architects to restore the Superdome. Our client was the state of Louisiana, FEMA, also the Louisiana Sports and Exposition District, which is a board appointed by the governor to oversee the Superdome, as well as the Saints and ASM, the group that manages the dome on a day-to-day basis. And the task was developing two sets of drawings, a set of drawings that would be priced to return it to its original condition, but then an enhanced set of documents, which was the last thing we wanted to do was return suites and seats and clubs and some systems to levels that were 30, 40 years old. And so that enhancement set allowed us to price enhancing those aspects of a building to contemporary modern codes and experiences, materials, finishes, those things that it would be foolish to upgrade. And the difference between the baseline cost of returning it to its previous condition and enhanced condition was where the negotiations took place as far as funding between FEMA and the state and NFL and other entities that were funding the project. But it was okay. It can get. I mean, looking back, it's quite wild because little things like an escalator step had experienced levels of deterioration from the hurricane. And so we had to assign to each escalator step a condition, a B condition, a C condition. Then, for example, on the massive steel structural system, there's fireproofing. Well, the winds and water that entered the dome washed off some of the fireproofing. And of course, the structure's not safe without fireproofing. So how do you accurately document returning fireproofing to the level that is required by present day code? So there's just all these bizarre, nuanced conditions. And of course, when we were hired, I think this is accurate. We were hired and given about 13 months to opening day. We were a month into the project, and we were advised that the governor, Kathleen Blanco, at the time, was strongly encouraging us, which means telling us to expedite the project to, I think it was either 10 or 11. And then at the time, Paul Tagliabue, the NFL commissioner, traveled to New Orleans and agreed to financially support the project. But he even put the gauntlet down to have it completed within a few months, quicker than that. And I remember when he asked me and a few others if we could accomplish it, I looked at Doug Thornton and he said, "Trey, I'm going to answer for you. The answer is yes." And I remember as the commissioner left, we looked at each other and said, "How are we going to do this?" We had absolutely no idea. But I remember we came up with the term game day ready. What is the scope that would be required for that opening game, the Saints versus Atlanta? And
why do you think the rush? Why the rush to get it done quicker?
Well, boy, there was no question that night in the Dome when you attended the game. The impact on the city was just magical. I think the governor knew that, and she acknowledged the importance of opening schools, opening hospitals, and all these other equally important assets, but that the Dome is it's the living room for our community. And the beauty of the Dome's age is the memory of experience and events, things that have taken place from a president to the Pope to Mardi Gras events to magical moments with the Saints and college football. And, you can't escape those things that are part of memory, right? And she knew that the community needed hope, and that if we could pull this off, the hope it would instill in the community would be significant and serve us all in knowing that we would not only survive, but in some ways become elevated as a community, that you could believe in humanity, that we have the ability to withstand something as tragic as that, and become better and stronger as a community.
Did you see parallels as you were going through the process of the community building around you as well, and not just the Superdome, but homes being rebuilt alongside it?
That's what was really touching. As I said, I lived in Baton Rouge. Our firm was based in Baton Rouge at the time. It's now based out of New Orleans. But we would attend these meetings, and there were dozens of people in the meeting. These were huge meetings that would last all day at times. And when we would conclude these meetings at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, a large percentage of those in the meetings would go home and deal with these same issues with their personal homes. They were removing wet sheetrock and wooden floors and searching for ways to return their homes to occupiable structures. Yeah, and you were very much aware it seemed like there was constant footage on the news, aerial footage, revealing the number of blue tarps, and it just appeared to be on every roof of every house. And so you were aware, very much aware, of the impact throughout the community, both not only in assets that support the community, but office structures, medical facilities, schools, daycare facilities, but people's private homes.
So you're rebuilding something massive. This is such a huge task, and you're making it more hurricane resistant. What does that involve? And then also other weather factors. We just talked about the recent snow in New Orleans. Is that something you were prepared for? What about flooding? We're talking about something below, sea level. So all of these factors, it's such a risky place. How do you prepare for all of those when building this?
As it relates to flood, it's about moving equipment that was at a certain level, a lower level, a street level. and elevating it such that a flood, of course, would not impact mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, pumps, transformers, electrical panels. And so that those are easy decisions. As it relates to the roof, we're talking about almost a 9.8 acre roof, a building that's 2 million square feet. And so as it relates to the roof, we actually looked at somewhere between 15 and 20 different roofing systems and brought on a number of roofing consultants, and of course had many hours and days and weeks of discussion of what was the pull-out resistance of a certain screw type, of a certain adhesive type, those types of things. Because the client group, FEMA and the state, made us very much aware that it was a race against time as it relates to the next hurricane season is not that far away, and we would be held accountable if the new roof structure was not fully in place or it was in some compromised condition. So we settled on a spray foam roof, and because of its resistance to hurricane force winds, its insulation values, and its ability to withstand, or to some degree remain white, because that was very important as far as reflectance factors and heat absorption or reflection. As it relates to the exterior skin, we later began to deal with the exterior aluminum. It was the anodized aluminum exterior skin that makes that kind of graceful waist line. That anodization process was really old at the time, and so it, over the years, began to fade and was just not as beautiful as what was originally spec'd. And so more modernized processes for anodizing aluminum elevated the thickness and the wearability of that aluminum. And so the decision was made to remove the entire exterior anodized aluminum skin, um, and rebuild it with a new contemporary system that remains at its level of depth and color and reflectance and beauty as any new system would. It also is a system, the old system, if a panel was damaged, let's say 2/3 of the way up the building, you had to remove every panel below it to replace that damaged panel. The system we replaced the exterior skin with is called a rain screen system, and each panel is independent of the other to the degree that if a panel is damaged from flying debris or something like that, you can replace that specific panel without removing other panels. So a much more efficient system.
Gotcha. Okay, new questions keep popping in my head. Tell me about, are there any kind of green initiatives within the Superdome itself that have really brought it to 2025?
Yeah, well, just replacing mechanical and electrical systems themselves, elevates them to levels of efficiency. We're hopeful that down the road we will implement more green systems in time, but we're hopeful that we'll find ourselves in a position where we'll remove the 2 parking garages adjacent to the dome in time and possibly create a green park around the dome with assets, other hotels, restaurants, and community type programming where the dome grounds are used more or less 24/7, 365 as a park. So that's a vision the architecture team has, and we're hopeful that one day those parking garages will be dislodged from their kind of embedded positions as it relates, and we create exactly what you're touching on, a park, something that is green as it relates to rain and water runoff. It's absorptive, and it's about water filtration, it's about carbon sequestration and these things. So we did all the things we could as it relates to internal systems, as well as other things. I remember working with the Justice Department and dealing with universal accessibility. And, at the time the dome was built, those issues had not been elevated to the importance that we place on them today. And so what was really extraordinary was this client group privileging universal accessibility. So, and I mean throughout the dome in the most beautiful ways that just bring tremendous dignity to that sector of society. In fact, in some levels, in some places, the universal accessibility seats have some of the finest seating positions and relationships to the field and the game, better than most in the entire venue.
Okay. If there was another major hurricane or major weather disaster in New Orleans, is the Superdome a safe place for people to seek refuge at this point?
Yeah, I don't think that they have. I'm not up to date on if it has been chosen as a place of refuge. That said, it is an extremely safe structure. The structure was placed in models, and analysis were performed that confirmed that it meets modern day structural codes and requirements, not only for its base structural system, but its roofing system and its exterior skin and smoke evac and vertical circulation systems, which are stairs, elevators, and escalators. If I was in a position where I had to retreat to the dome, I would personally feel extremely safe.
Did you have any idea when you were doing this design that there was going to be a foot of snow on the roof at some point soon?
No, and I did. I mean, as it began to snow, and of course, I didn't think there was any way we would experience a foot of snow. I thought, we might get a quarter an inch to an inch. And I would occasionally look outside of my home and see it building. I thought, wow, snow load in New Orleans is a different concept as it relates to our buildings. There's so many safety factors with the code that, thank goodness to the brilliant minds that have written the codes over the years and continue to elevate the codes in response to weather and natural disasters, that as we build new and as we upgrade facilities, as much as we still experience the impact of these storms, we are building so much smarter. And I think in general we're tremendously responsible with learning from the impact of storm and weather as it's evolved.
All right, Super Bowl coming up. I know the Superdome reconstruct or redesign kind of happened in phases, and maybe a little bit more fun stuff towards the end leading up to the Super Bowl. Is there anything you can tell me that people who are watching it on TV, like little Easter eggs, whereas we're watching, that you can point out that we should look for that are really cool?
Yeah, what I find most exciting is, so on each of the sidelines and on each of the end zones were two massive ramps. And these ramps were the vertical circulation strategy to both enter and exit the dome. And as part of the Katrina scope of work, we identified that if we removed those two massive ramps on either sideline, that the dome would enjoy the benefit of an additional 100,000 square feet. And this 100,000 additional square feet footage would contribute to servicing at the lower levels and other levels general seats, at some levels club seats, and at other levels suites. And so the way the dome is servicing the customer, so to speak, is universally at a much higher level. But the question became, what is our circulation strategy? And so, as you know, we refer to neighborhoods as faubourgs. And so early on, we started discussing how do we take these faubourgs, these neighborhoods around the dome, and bring them into the dome and turn the faubourg, the neighborhood, vertical. And so we found this space in three of the four corners where we could literally cut each of the floor plates out and create these massive atriums that are the full height of the dome. In fact, they terminate at what's called the gutter tub, which is a massive gutter that's in between the top outer aluminum wall and the lower tip of the dome itself. And so we carved out these beautiful atriums in three of the four corners. We lined them with that same anodized aluminum, but in a tubing condition. And we're flying through these spaces, these escalators that take you like from the 200 level to the 500 level. And so, but the tubes allow people that are moving around these atriums to see into it And so there are these beautiful neighborhoods of activity where you see people moving up and down through the escalators. You see people moving around them. And it just gives you a better sense of where you are pre-entering the kind of holy of holies, the main communal room around the field. And so it's a beautiful space, the way light moves in that space. And of course, it's magical to see a child or even an adult looking up as they move up an escalator into this space or descending down through the space. Yeah, I just think it's a very effective way of connecting what is typically thought of as a venue with hierarchy, club, suite, general seat, unifying people, and in the most beautiful way, elevating the person who's in the cheapest seat to a place of saying, we acknowledge your participation, your involvement, and elevate the arrival sequence for everyone to a level where dignity is brought to each person. And I just think that's tremendous when a client makes that decision, as opposed to saying the revenue per seat of a suite is so much higher, or the revenue as it relates to it per seat of a club is so much higher. So let's create an arrival sequence for those patrons, that client group, that far exceeds the prominence and importance of the general seating. And this remarkable client constantly reminded us that each and every person that attends any event in this venue is of equal importance to the diversity and beauty of the celebration of that event. And so we should bring that elevated experience to each person. And I just think that's pretty incredible.
That is pretty incredible. Is it so important to know the community in which you're designing for?
Oh, absolutely. It's everything. We in the firm use the word rootedness all the time because today there are so many structures that are designed utilizing the latest in computer technology, but these buildings and the designers have forgotten about the early watershed of a place, the unique soils of a place that give birth to certain tree species or wood or certain the way the earliest settlers planted, what was the agrarian aspect to the community. And of course, that relates to the culture and the cuisine of place. And so for us, we do a deep dive into the history of a community and say, who settled here first? What did they grow? How was the city originally parceled? And that was plantations, of course. And how do all these things contribute to informing a physical response that feels on an intellectual level and an intuitive level, very much a part of community. Because a building like us all does age in patina, and you want it to age in patina in the most beautiful way so that every day it's far more beautiful as opposed to far less beautiful than its day of opening.